The sun rose over the bustling city of New Shanghai, lighting the towering glass and metal skyscrapers that housed millions. Jake sipped his coffee as he stepped onto the maglev train, joining the stream of commuters heading into work. But for Jake, it was another day off to his workshop to tinker. As his stop approached, he gazed out at the lush parks and water features flowing between the buildings, shining in the morning light. This was the life he and billions others had built across dozens of colony worlds, a life of peace and prosperity. Stepping off the train, Jake strolled the 20 minutes to his workshop, passing through a vibrant outdoor market. Floating drones maneuvered between the stalls, transporting goods while vendors called out their wares. As always, the latest technologies mingled with timeless arts, people browsing holographic displays and tasting fresh fruits from a dozen worlds. Jake smiled, thinking of the advances they had achieved in just a century since humanity's expansion beyond Earth first began. Once in his workshop, Jake pulled up the latest sensor readings from his asteroid mining operations. Along with billions of other small entrepreneurs, he operated automated fleets that harvested resources from beyond the system. Lately, returns had slowed from the frontier worlds. He wrote it off as business cycles, but a small knot of unease grew in his stomach. That evening, at home in his apartment, those worries resurfaced as the news broke reports of attacks in the Athabasca and Tripoli clusters, dozens of light years from New Shanghai. Entire colonies wiped out overnight. Survivors told of relentless bombing, cities reduced to rubble. No warnings, no negotiations, just annihilation. Video footage showed alien vessels, unlike any recorded. In the following days, a somber mood fell over the colonies as more reports came in. Entire prefectures along the frontier gone silent. Hundreds of millions dead or missing. The Union Council called an emergency session. In the public forum, speakers urged calm, but voiced new fears had their peaceful expansion finally encountered a hostile power. 2 weeks later, the first refugees began arriving. Jake volunteered at the transit hub, helping families still in shock. One woman holding a bundled infant recounted watching meteors rain down on her small town. "They herded the survivors into camps," she said numbly. "We heard screams at night." With each new group, Jake pieced together a clearer picture of their attackers. Methodical, merciless, calling themselves the Rasnar. Their ships descended like death, then vanished without a trace. Even the military was caught off guard. Their colonies had always enjoyed perfect security, but long brutal Jake redoubled his efforts collecting supplies for the refugees. But another thought nagged at him. He diverted one of his mining ships, rerouting it out towards the frontier clusters under the pretense of salvage. If the Rasnar truly threatened them all, he had to see for himself. 2 weeks later, his ship sent back chilling footage, entire planets bombed back to the Stone Age. Wrecked cities prowled by alien patrols. As Jake studied the footage, a startling realization emerged. The Rasnar were not just invaders. They had come to erase humanity from the stars. The attacks shocked humanity to its core. Overnight, colony worlds that had flourished for generations were silenced. Millions lay dead, with more still unaccounted for. Across the Union of Earth, people gathered in streets and public forums, weeping as reports emerged of the atrocities committed by the Rasnars. In the halls of government, an emergency session was underway. Jake Sato joined a massive crowd that had gathered outside, hoping for answers. After several hours, the UE president appeared on a towering screen. "My fellow citizens, a grave threat has emerged beyond our borders. Alien aggressors calling themselves the Rasnars have launched unprovoked attacks against our colonies. Their actions have taken hundreds of millions of innocent lives." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. The president continued, "Make no mistake, we did not seek this conflict. But we will ensure it ends here. I have authorized a full mobilization of our defense forces. More, we will take the fight to the Rasnars and liberate every world they have invaded. To the attackers, I say this, you have declared war on all of humanity. We will meet your cruelty with strength, your hatred with justice, your dark ambitions with the light of freedom." Thunderous cheers drowned out the end of the speech. The crowd surged in emotion, crying out for vengeance. Hope and resolve now mingled with grief. Jake felt a steely determination take hold. He would do his part to help humanity prevail in this dark hour. In the following weeks, the Union mobilized on a scale never seen. Shipyards and factories operated around the clock to supply fleets mustering at strategic points. Robotic labor handled much of the production, allowing volunteers to focus on rapid training and deployment of new defense forces. Engineers raced to upgrade existing warships with the latest stealth, sensor, and weapons technology. Entire cities were retooled for defense production. Market districts transformed overnight into aircraft construction zones. Multiply redundant systems and strategic stockpiling ensured continued output even if enemy strikes managed to penetrate key systems. Trillions of resources were poured into the war effort from public and private sources alike. Jake closed his workshop to enlist as a sensor technician aboard one of the first assault carriers. Undergoing accelerated training, he learned technical skills far beyond his engineer background. His assimilation was eased by a fierce devotion shared by all recruits to wipe out this new terror stalking the colonies and ensure no others would follow in the Raznar's path. Initial probes detected massing Raznar fleets along the borders of invaded space. UE Command plotted maneuvers to bait isolated elements away from the main hosts. In a daring raid, Jake and his carrier group ambushed a Raznar battle group scouting nearby systems. Overwhelming firepower reduced the alien ships to debris within minutes. But casualties were higher than expected. The Raznars fought with a terrible ferocity. Morale surged at the small victory. Across the frontier, more skirmishes turned the tide as humanity's superior numbers and coordination began to tell. Within weeks, major pushes reclaimed the closest colonies and drove deep into Raznar space. But as they penetrated deeper, reconnaissance revealed the full extent of enemy mobilization. Trillions more as Raznars swarmed whole worlds, dwarfing initial estimates. The road ahead would be long and punishing. Jake's carrier was deployed with a massive fleet for the biggest operation yet, retaking the vital Epsilon Indi system. Intelligence warned the 4 colonized planets there had become fortress staging areas. The upcoming battle would be humanity's first test of strength against the Raznar's core forces. In the carrier's bustling sea, I see crew hurried last-minute checks as the countdown to drop out of FTL began. Jake steeled himself, knowing the brutal fight to liberate Epsilon Indi had only just started. The fleet emerged from hyperspace on the outskirts of the Epsilon Indi system. Ahead, the local star shined brightly as Jake's carrier and accompanying battle group approached the inner planets. According to scans, 4 inhabited worlds orbited within the comfortable zone. But reconnaissance revealed the once verdant planets now teemed with enemy activity. Fortified shipyards in high orbit belched clouds of construction. Military emplacements dotted the surfaces, their cannons tracking any movement. Intelligence estimated over 1 billion Raznars occupied the system, entrenching for a climactic stand. Aboard the flagship, Admiral Lee addressed the fleet. "Our colonies were ruthlessly attacked, and billions remain enslaved. Today we liberate Epsilon Indi and push the aliens back on all fronts. Stealth and coordinated strikes will breach their defenses. Then our warriors will land to finish the job planetside. No mercy for these butchers. For our people engage all." On Jake's carrier, crews rushed to space docks as the battle began. Cloaked assault wings accelerated hard, angling towards separate targets. Capital ships unleashed barrages of precision missiles to blind sensors before the first starfighters swooped in low. Nuclear warheads and relativistic kill vehicles pulverized orbital defenses. Emerging from a blown hatch, Jake launched with his squadron. Break right, focus firebombers before they can lock on colonies. With practiced coordination, they wiped out enemy bomber wings trying to retreat to the planets. But swarming starfighters engaged them, lasers strobing in the black. Jake felt his shield drained before a wingmate finished off his tail. As more allied ships arrived, the tide turned. Admiral Lee directed fleets to engage supercarriers and dredge the system. Jake smiled, seeing shattered enemy ships float among the stars, their crews dead in the vacuum. But losses continued for every Rasnor destroyed. 5 more seemed to appear. The fight to control orbital space dragged into a long, brutal slog. Meanwhile, troop carriers accelerated towards the planets. Nuclear-shaped charges breached thick atmospheres, unleashing megatons to wipe out entrenched positions. Wings of gunships deployed flechette missiles by the thousand, reducing fortresses to rubble. Allied boots hit the ground amid chaos and shattered remnants. Over months, the liberation of Epsilon Indi dragged on. City by irradiated city, the Rasnars were pushed back into hastily dug trenchworks. But they never broke, fighting to the last for every block and bunker. Allied troops suffered horribly even as air supremacy was achieved. But the tide was turning. Civilians emerged from the ruins, cheering their soldiers on. Finally, in a remote volcano complex, Marines cornered the last Rasnar defenders. A desperate charge was met with withering fire, cutting them down by the dozens. Silence fell as smoke drifted through cracked tunnels. It was over. Epsilon Indi belonged to humanity once more. Yet the cost weighed heavily. Hundreds of billions had died across the system. And from prison camps, intelligence alleged the majority of the Rasnar people remained untouched deep in their core worlds. Jake knew the coming battles would make Epsilon Indi seem a small victory. The war was only halfway done. And in the stars ahead, untold millions more would face judgment in the fires of freedom.